EOM away, EOM away, Azazel, witches, psychics, come forth. Jimmy has the story. Jimmy.
Well, you guys know how they say, speak of the devil and he shall appear. He might be appearing now in Cynthia, but, that never happens to me, and it doesn't happen to any other atheists I know. No, the devil and his demons only seem to ever possess Christians and other believers, and these believers in the Most High God are always let down by this God, while we atheists are just wondering what the hell is going on. Well, in this segment, we have a couple of articles outlining the mechanics of how people become possessed. But we here at the Nonprofits Tonight will tell you what's going on. It's a scam, a hoax, a con. Religious organizations want to convince you that there is a problem so that they can charge you over the course of your lifetime, and they can fix that problem for you. You pay for their homes, their cars, their clothes, their vacations, and they sell you some fairy tale. In this segment, we will cover these articles detailing possession, devil worship, demonic affiliation, which I think showcase the scheme of religion quite well. These articles are from FaithWire by Billy Hallowell on October 31st, 2024.
Jimmy, I have to give you some pushback because everybody knows, that there are demons in the tubes at airports when you are going through TSA, and you cannot hear from Jesus properly unless you are on a private jet that costs you approximately $67 million paid by your parishioners. It's obvious.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
It is. It's empirically proven, obviously.
I looked it up.
I'm saying, right? Exactly. I saw a TikTok on it. Listen.
That's
all
the
evidence you need. All the evidence you need.
That's all you need. Listen. Okay. So, but back to the actual thing. So Jimmy, you introduced the story, and I believe that in the first article talked about a guy named Mike Signorelli, who actually drew a connection between spiritual struggles and genetic or epigenetic factors such as addiction or musicality. Now, I will have to say, reading this kind of brought back some memories of my time in the evangelical charismatic church, especially when you talked about generational curses. And let me just, for all of you all who were not privileged to actually be a part of this particular church, there was a lot of emphasis on what has happened in your past, like your family past, and how the devil has used your family past and to possibly influence you and the type of sin that you might find yourself in. Yeah. So he draws on these particular addiction factors, right? So how do you respond for this blending of biological and spiritual and trust? I use that loosely. Concepts.
I don't think that was the first article. I think that was the second article.
Sorry.
But as far as the blending, I don't think that there is a blending. I think that it's entirely environmental. I think this is an incredibly odd take on how people can be perpetually and generationally possessed. I've not heard that before, but I don't think genetics have anything to do with it. I don't think people are predisposed to being poor or being hooked on drugs or hooked on alcohol. I think the environment has a lot to play in those factors. If somebody is struggling and they're reliant on addiction, well, they're probably going to raise children or be around other children that are going to grow up in that environment and become, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but are going to mature through that. Their formative years are going to be, are going to use that environment to make sense of the world. And that's how they'll make sense of the world. Happens in religion. I think that people grow up religiously because they have religion forced upon them. And I think people believe that they can be possessed because they are told their entire lives that there are certain demons out there that are trying to possess them and trying to get their soul, which is why when I opened up in the intro, I said, I don't know any atheists that ever get possessed. Why is it the people that believe in this stuff and are praying to a God to protect them, they're the only ones that are vulnerable to the devil? I mean, if you really want to avoid being influenced by the devil, maybe you should just stop believing the garbage that you're believing in, and you'll be safe, because I'm safe. But yeah, I don't blend it. I think it's incredibly environmental. I don't know of any genetics. Now, I'm not a biologist, and I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but I would venture to say, in my 40 some odd years on this planet, that I think I've gathered enough information maybe to say that there are some traits that might make people more susceptible to addictive behaviors, and maybe those traits are passed to their children. But there isn't a devil or a demon that's possessing you, and then your children, and then your grandchildren, and then hooking onto you. That is a bit preposterous, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, just to speak to your last point about genetic predisposition to addictions and things of that nature, there are certain things about, like, possibly, let's say for instance, like if a parent was like addicted to certain type of drugs or what have you, and let's say for instance if they were doing those drugs while the parent was pregnant and had the baby, that that
Sure.
baby could also have that addiction, and has to be watched because of course they're not getting that drug, so they're going to go through withdrawal, which could possibly kill the child. So I mean, there's that particular factor. But I would have to agree with the notion of certain issues that a person that would be predisposed to would be more of an environmental thing rather than a genetic thing, right? Reason being is that when you are looking at data and statistics concerning like people who happen to be more predisposed to poverty, more predisposed to addictions, more predisposed to things that are just generally like a failure in society. If I were just to be just to say like how I really feel, or I will feel with facts, informed facts, um, they would have these particular predispositions because of the things that happen to be around them without having the proper, social determinants of health that's around them in order to prop up certain things that would keep them away from certain factors that could be more detrimental to them. If a person happens to be in a safer neighborhood where the infrastructure is is better for them, they have access to education, transportation, food, have like a stable like environment as far as like um, a loving people that's around them, not necessarily have to be in a nuclear family, you don't necessarily need that, but you do need stability, right? Then that would be more of a notion of how that particular child would be able to turn out versus a child that does not have them. Now, you would have like children who may be able to rise above it all, like this rising tide thing. But that's less of a thing that's going to happen with a child when they already have these particular adverse things dealt to them as as growing up. We know this because people who happen to be born into poverty, born of parents who may be addicted to drugs, born of an area where it's going to be under resourced. There is, it's not the majority of people who are coming out of those environments that's going to be a CEO of a Six Sigma company. Let's keep it on. Let's be honest here. And I think that when we are looking at these pastors, the Signorelli, and I was also going to ask you because you also brought this up Eli, about Ryan
Singular. Yeah.
Swaglar, whatever. I don't necessarily feel that bad of like, messing up his name, because I feel like a lot of his rhetoric is very problematic. But he's specifically the pastor that actually came out of, I believe, who was a Satanist. So I think that you mentioned specifically, was he a Satanist? Is this something, or is this something that he could possibly have made up to, like, make him look better so that it can give more credence to his story? Who knows? Like, give some of your thoughts when it comes to that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the first thought I always have whenever you hear like, oh, I used to be a hardcore atheist, or I used to be this, I used to be that, and now I'm a Christian because I experienced God or experienced Jesus. My first reaction is like, really? Because it's a tactic, it's a known tactic that people use all the time to talk about the the power of Christ's love, or the converting power, whatever they want to, however they want to frame it. So I looked into it, and yeah, the Satanic Church, the South African Satanic Church, he's the co-founder. He was the co-founder of it. He publicly defended it. I'm on a Facebook Live, so like public is a relative term, but sure. He publicly defended the church. He was actively involved in the South African Satanic Church, which that church did make a point to separate itself from the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple, and then in the US. So it was a separate entity, but he was actively involved with it. And so I was like, okay. And I'm reading the story, and he talks about how the Satanic Bible appealed to him because he considered himself wounded and broken, and he felt lost. And he said it appeals to people who feel that way. So he started to find something to relate to in the Satanic Church. And then he started interacting with some Christians, found happiness and love and acceptance there. And now he's living that lifestyle because he feels happy there. And I'm like, okay. He used to not believe in a thing that he now believes in. I think his reasons probably aren't that good, but he's happy. And this story in particular isn't about him causing any harm to anybody. So for the moment, he's not doing anything wrong.
You know what, though? Can I point something out? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Please do. Yeah. No. Yeah.
But you just brought up a really interesting point that I want to tack down right now. So the guy related to Satanism because he was feeling down, right? And found something to bring him up. In the Christian perspective, being a Satanist is a way to lift you up. So he really did the same thing twice, didn't he? Right? Like he got lifted up by his Satanist beliefs, whatever, and then came across some Christians and was like, hey, I'm going to get lifted up again. And I don't know. It just goes to show you, like, Satanism and Christianity, you would think they're so different, but really they had the same outcome, didn't they? And they come from the same place. I mean, I always like to remind Christians, Satan's your guy. Like, Satan, you came up with this guy. Like, he's a Christian deity. Anyway, sorry, Eli. I just wanted to. I thought that was great. Thank you. Yeah.
No, that's right. But then see, I had that thought at first, and then you read the rest of his story, and it looks, walks, and quacks just like every other. I used to not be a Christian, and now I was saved, and I'm a Christian because I interacted with Jesus, and it was super special. It's just like every other one of those stories. And when I saw your notes at first, I saw your notes, Jimmy, before I finished reading the article, and I was like,
plagiarized is what you're saying.
I said, why is he so skeptical? And then I read the rest of it. I was like, oh, okay, that's why.
Well, actually, Jimmy, I was going to ask you about this too, because you brought this up about an article too about cyclical indoctrination. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. So the church really benefits from a person being indoctrinated, but then that person turning around and indoctrinating their own kids. And then those kids, like I said, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, like, that's how Christianity survives. It doesn't just take advantage of one person, but it causes that person, it gives that person the tools or the fear to do the same thing to their own kids. And by the time you're 80 years old and your kids are, I don't know, 50, and then your grandkids are 20. I mean, you've got a bunch of people now, 3 generations paying into this machine, which I've stated in other segments that we've done. earlier this week, I think is just nothing more than a power structure. And so the church really does benefit by creating a lifetime client, but not just a lifetime client, a multi-lifetime client. And that's what I mean by cyclical indoctrination.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about that, Eli?
I mean, yeah, it does seem so. The idea of what I focused on a lot was, I didn't really think of the cyclical indoctrination route, but as far as like this idea that like, oh, like you have a curse on your family from years back because you've all been sinful and you've all been terrible. And like he does, like there are concepts that we know, like, yeah, there is a genetic factor to predisposition to addiction. There are some neurodivergent tendencies can cause people to chase dopamine, which can lead to addictive like behavior or addiction like behaviors or actual addiction. So we know that those things exist, but it doesn't apply to things like musicality or, having bad luck, or having like a family curse, as Signorelli is trying to point it out. And he goes on to say, we can make the logical leap from the genetic to the epigenetic to the spiritual.
No.
Right. People just kind of follow that because they're like, oh, well, yeah. And that's where that indoctrination comes in. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. But my thought is like, what is the pattern? Like what details between genetic and epigenetic can you like expand on to then logically follow to spiritual? I don't understand how that's the logical leap.
Oh my God.
So it's this idea where he can say basically anything he wants to the people that are listening to him, and they're not going to question him on it, because as Jimmy pointed out, it's this idea that you have something wrong that you can't fix on your own, and we're going to do it. He didn't call it an exorcism. He called it a deliverance. They were going to do a deliverance, and it's not just a single exorcism. It seems to me like it's sort of this like pyramid scheme of exorcism where it's like, like you get 3 more people to do the exorcism, and all 3 of them are going to get 3 more people to do the exorcism. But as they all do it, you get a portion of theirs. So eventually, you don't have to do your own. And it just go ahead.
No, I was about to say it's like the MLM of deliverance.
Exactly.
Multi-level marketing of deliverance. Yeah, no, yeah. I remember like being in churches like that where, they had like deliverance services. They, the pastor, the prophet, the bishop, whatever that person's title happened to be, would, discern a spirit or multiple spirits that you may be possessed with, and have to, get the special oil, okay, to slather all over your face, mess up all of your clothing. The other nurses had to, and I use nurse very loosely, get the sheets, because you're going to eventually fall out, so that they can go ahead and call out those particular demons that you have been possessed by, that you're possessed by, that have followed you from generation to generation. I'm sorry, I am so triggered by these articles, because like it really like points out how problematic this rhetoric is for people who happen to be in churches like that. They go around their entire lives thinking that because the devil did whatever to my great-great-grandmother, that I am under this curse. I'm cursed with a curse. And they'll pull out the biblical portions of the Bible that will corroborate said curse with a curse, that you have to get slathered with oil, and then eventually, hopefully, the demon will leave you. But you have to do all these particular other rituals in your life in order for you to not be demon possessed again by the same spirit, because it's always going to be after you. And it's an issue to me when you are constantly like, putting this particular notion on people who are going to be vulnerable because they believe what you say. I just want to slap these people. And we do not, on the nonprofits, really, we don't condone violence. We don't. This is Cynthia, okay? Cynthia wants to slap these pastors, but I do not encourage you to slap people, because you can go to jail. And if you don't have a lawyer on retainer, you could actually stay in jail. So don't do that. Proverbially slap them in your mind, or basically just use a tongue lashing to say that this is not okay. But I know that we are rounding up, and trust, listen, I can get triggered all night long on this particular topic. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stop myself right there so that I don't go on a word vomit. But I want to give you to the final say when it comes to these particular two articles concerning witches and demons and devils, oh my. I want you to chime in with your final thoughts, Eli, and then Jimmy, I want you to go ahead and close us out, please.
I just like one last thing that I noted about the article was like one of the claims that he makes, which goes along with that he can say whatever he wants and no one's going to question him. He says that upwards of 30% of the gospel accounts, if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, upwards of 30% of them involve Jesus confronting a demon, which is absolutely just not true at all. There's 89 chapters across the four gospels and only like less than 15 exorcism stories, and like 8 to 10 of them have details, and then the rest are just kind of general mentions. But then you realize that he's changing the definition of confronting a demon to be whatever he wants. So now, like every time Jesus heals somebody, that was confronting a demon, and is using that as his sort of selling point to get the people that he's taking advantage of to be like, well, if all of the establishment of Christianity, if this much of what Jesus did was confronting demons, then that's what we should be doing as Christians too.
Right. Jimmy?
Yeah. The church is a business. Churches are businesses. They exist to make money, and it is a hierarchy where the people with the most money are at the top, or I should say, the people at the top take all the money. It's no different than any other organization that sells things to people. It's just that churches sell really bad products, and people buy them because that product seems to be a cure for a made-up sickness that you don't really have. These articles are very different from each other, but they both point to the fact that, religion tries to convince you that you're sick, that there's a problem, and then it offers itself up as the cure. And that's what the whole business is about.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, because I actually wrote this in my notes, that actually both stories reflect a human need for meaning and guidance in the face of life struggles.
Mm-hmm.
But they also caution against romanticizing and overemphasizing supernatural explanations, particularly when they overshadow more grounded, practical solutions. And I just want to also just like say this specifically to people who happen to have been in churches that actually taught this and are still feeling some of the trauma that you may have exposed, that you have been exposed to. Please get help. Please seek the Recovery from Religion is a great resource for you to actually seek help at, and the Secular Therapy Project. Please consider that as well. And if you also want to consider more nonprofits, click here.